Here are the top 10 reasons why I prefer real estate over any other type of investment. And at the end, I give a bonus reason, which is best of all. Before we start, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience of investing in Australian residential property, which made me a multimillionaire and allowed me to retire from the workforce at the age of 36. Here we go. It has a high intrinsic value. Everyone needs somewhere to live. It's one of the most basic human needs along with air, food and water. No other type of investment class is that important. It's why even if the stock market, economy or world goes to hell, property will still be valuable because everyone needs a place to live. COVID was a great example of that. The property market boomed because people were desperate to upgrade into something with more space or for a better lifestyle. I remember in the early stages of COVID, the media was stoking fear with headlines like, "The property market's gonna crash." I remember thinking, how could it? We weren't in a bubble and everyone needs it more than ever. Unfortunately, some of those headlines got to people. One of my mates sold his entire property portfolio out of fear. He lost out on one of the biggest boom periods we've ever had. Personally, during COVID, I bought 4 houses and my property grew over $1 million during that time. Number 2, it goes up in value. A well-placed property will always appreciate in value over time. Over the past 25 years, Australian residential property has increased around 6% year on year across the whole country, which is actually pretty amazing. That marginally beats out the ASX All Ords over the same period. You can achieve even better results by having good properties in well-placed areas, which are areas people want to live. One of my houses in Brisbane has tripled in value since I bought it in 2013. All I did was paint it and fix up the kitchen. That's an average of 11.13% growth year on year, which is absolutely amazing. Some of my properties are growing faster than that and others are slower. On average though, they're all above 7% year on year growth, which means they're all on track to double in value every 7 to 10 years. Number 3, it makes you wealthy. When you own your own home, you don't need to rent anymore. That means you're not paying off someone else's mortgage and making them rich. Sure, you're paying your own mortgage, but you get all the benefits of the growth. If you turn that house into an investment, not only do you get the growth, but your tenants pay off the mortgage for you, which is brilliant. I caught up with some friends in Sydney recently and I congratulated them for owning a property because they were probably richer than they realized. They looked puzzled and sort of didn't believe me. So I pulled up my phone, entered their property address and generated the same report the banks use to value a property. Sure enough, the valuation came back $200,000 higher than what they bought the property for a few years earlier. They were absolutely blown away. Then I said, imagine if you had 4 more, you'd have $1 million of equity without doing a thing. And that was the penny drop moment. Number 4, you can use equity to buy more property. I was explaining this to a friend overseas and it blew his mind. When your house grows in value, the difference between that amount and your mortgage is called equity. The bank will allow you to access that equity provided they didn't see a massive risk in doing so. Each bank has different rules, but most allow you to pull out 80% and some up to 95%. So imagine you have a $500,000 mortgage and your property is valued at $1 million. That's $500,000 worth of gross equity. The amount the bank will give you is called available equity. At 80%, the bank will give you $300,000. At 90%, they'll give you $400,000. If we apply that to my friends in Sydney, they bought their house for $650,000. And to keep things simple, let's also assume the mortgage is the same. The property is now worth $850,000. So they have $200,000 worth of gross equity. Their available equity at 90% LVR means the bank will give them $115,000 minus any fees and charges. That's brilliant. And here's the best thing about accessing equity. It's tax-free. I used equity to buy a lot of my properties, or at least contribute to the purchase, so I didn't have to save up as much money. Number 5, land is a limited resource. Its location cannot be duplicated or replicated. Unlike in business, where competitors can copy your product and take away your market share, with land, that simply can't happen. People will always trip over themselves to buy a well-placed property because that's the only one. Local competition from new houses and developments is also not really a threat unless your property is in a new estate or there's massive amounts of vacant land right next to you, which I would then argue your property is not well placed, or at least it's not for a period of time. Generally speaking, anything anyone does around you to improve the value of their property is actually good for you. Personally, I want everyone around me to be improving the value of their houses, especially my neighbours. And this is the opposite to shares, where new competition can cause the share price to plummet. With property, it just makes you more wealthy. Number 6, You can forcibly increase the value of your asset, and it's totally legal. If you try to forcibly alter the value of a stock, you'd probably get done for market manipulation. In property, it's called sweat equity, which basically means increasing the value through a renovation, development, or some other labor-intensive capital improvement. It is an excellent strategy to get the most out of your property. Even a simple coat of paint can help increase the rent, attract a better quality tenant, and increase the property's overall value. When doing any capital improvements, you want to aim for a 2-to-1 return. So, for every dollar spent, you increase the value by $2. Here's an example. On my first house in Brisbane, I spent $10,000 on a basic renovation, and $5,000 of that was me buying expensive Milwaukee power tools because I like to pretend I'm a tradie. I took 3 weeks off work and I got stuck into it. If I didn't want to do the work myself, I could have spent the $5,000 on labor and got the same result. Upon completion, the property was revalued at $40,000 above the purchase price. Rent also increased $40 a week, and I got to keep all my tools. That's a 4-to-1 return. Now I know trades and materials are way more expensive nowadays, but so are house prices, so it still stacks up. During the middle of COVID, I bought a house in Perth that was in absolutely terrible condition. I engaged a builder to do all the renovations because I live in Queensland and it's on the other side of the country. My budget was 30 grand, but I ended up spending 60 grand because trade and material prices were absolutely extreme. However, the market tracks to inflation, so it valued up well in the end at 120 grand, which is a 2-to-1 return. Number 7, high leverage. Banks view residential property as a really safe asset class, which is why they will lend you up to 90% of the purchase price. This ratio is known as the loan to value ratio, or LVR for short. High LVRs don't happen with other asset classes because the banks simply see them as more risky. If you tried to go to your bank and ask for a 95% lend for, say, NFT or crypto, they'd laugh at you and ask you to leave. This makes property more attainable because you can use a smaller deposit to purchase it. The best thing about high leverage is it allows you to build massive wealth when used wisely. Here's how. Let's say you buy a $1 million property with a 5% deposit, so a 95% LVR. You only need to contribute 50 grand plus costs, and the bank lends you the remaining 950. You now own a really expensive asset for a very little amount of invested capital, and that asset's going to be growing at least 6% per annum. So in 1 year, it'll grow 60 grand, you only put in 50 grand plus costs. Your return on invested capital is 120% minus costs in 1 year. That is excellent. And the longer you hold the property, the better it gets. One of the first properties I bought cost me $47,321 in total. That's deposit plus costs. I've owned it for 11 years and it's grown by $377,000, which is a 797% return on invested capital. That's incredible. The ability to take that equity and use it to buy more properties, which all grow in value, and then you rinse and repeat the process, is what builds real wealth real quick. Number 8, tax benefits. This is great. Because property is not strictly an investment class, it has really favorable tax benefits. So, if your house is your principal place of residence, which is the place you live in and don't rent out, it has 0 capital gains tax when you sell it. So if you buy it for $1 million and sell it for $2 million, that's $1 million you get tax-free. That's excellent. Or if your house is an investment and you sell it after a year or more, you get a 50% discount on any capital gains. You also get back any expenses that form part of the property's cost base, like stamp duty. So if you bought it for $1 million and you sold it for $2 million, you've made $1 million capital gain. With the discount, you get to pocket $500,000 of that, and the remainder, minus the cost base, is subject to your nominal tax rate. Here's the mind-blowing thing about the CGT discount. If you sold a property for 45 grand or more after a year of owning it, you would get to keep more of the profits than if you were making the same amount from a corporate job. When you buy and hold to maximize your wealth, like I do, you incur expenses. Thankfully, the ATO recognizes that owning investment property is similar to running a business. Things like interest repayments, repairs, maintenance, management fees, insurance rates, etc. are all valid out-of-pocket expenses that are tax deductible. By far, the biggest tax benefit is depreciation, which is not necessarily an out-of-pocket expense. Basically, the ATO recognizes that buildings and everything in them depreciate in value over time. So whilst in reality your property is actually increasing in value, on paper, the ATO sees sees it as losing value, which you can claim. The amount varies on the age of the house and how much the building is worth. But let me be clear, if you have an investment property and you don't have a depreciation report, you are being taxed more than you should. I have a depreciation report for every single property I own, and I get back thousands per property, sometimes tens of thousands per property per year. I actually enjoy tax time because of the amount of money I get back. Number 9, its value is insured. This is awesome and so very important. If the property burns down, gets flooded or otherwise destroyed in an insurable event, it gets fixed at the cost of your premium. You can't insure your shares if the company burns down or has incompetent people inside it, which is actually highly likely. Whereas property, if the tenant stops paying rent or trashes the place, it gets fixed and rent compensation paid out. The more properties you have, the higher the likelihood of an insurable event happening. So I cannot stress how important insurance is when you own property. I've had heaps of insurable events, some storm related and some tenant related, and I can confidently say not all insurers are the same, but I would not own a property without insurance. One of my houses was massively damaged in a storm, causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage. The insurance company agreed to fix it, and I went a step further and demonstrated that the damage also rendered the property uninhabitable. And under the policy, they had to cover the rent until completion. After the renovation, I had the property revalued, and it valued higher than before. And because the property looked better than before too, I was also able to increase the rent at the start of the next lease. Win-win. Number 10, you own all of it. There is no risk of your ownership being diluted like with shares. It's all yours. And the benefit of 100% ownership is you call the shots on what happens to it. You choose what tenant goes in, who should manage it on your behalf, what insurer covers it, and when and whether to increase the value through sweat equity. For me, this is so much more appealing than shares, where the fate of your investment return is in the hands of executives and employees that you have zero control over. Your property is 100% yours, and to the maximum extent possible, you control its fate and your fortunes. So, that's the top 10 reasons why, in my experience, property is the best asset class. But here's a bonus reason, and this is the best one. Property can turn ordinary people into millionaires and multimillionaires. Owning a property is so important, even if it's not an investment. Think about your parents and grandparents. They've probably owned their home for decades, which is now worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions. They probably didn't set out to get wealthy from property, but it happened anyway, because property grows in value over time. That's just what happens. Investing in property supercharges these results through owning multiple and letting time do the rest. Before you know it, you're sitting on millions, and trust me, you'll thank yourself for it. I'm Brett, and this is Fire Property. Thanks for watching.